Welcome back into the channel, everyone. As you can tell, there is new surroundings here, and that's because, yes, we are finally in our new home here in Colorado. And so you're gonna hear a little bit of an echo from me today. I apologize, haven't put the soundproofing up in the office yet, so it's kind of an empty room, but we'll get through it. So once again, my name is Tom. I'm the founder of Vertical Motion. We help mid-career professionals become executives, and we help executives become better leaders. If that's interesting to you, there's a link down below in the description of this video that will help you figure out how to communicate with us and connect with us if that's something you want to change and improve in your career. Today, I am excited to bring to you a very good friend of mine, someone that I've worked closely with over the last year. His name is Mr. Eduardo Lew. He joins us from Mexico City, and he is someone who is really gifted at helping people become their peak versions of themselves. So with that, good to see you, Eduardo. How are you?
I'm doing good, Tom. Really appreciate the warm intro. It's a true honor and a pleasure to be here having this conversation with you. So thank you for the invite.
Absolutely. Okay, so right off the bat, I like to ask people who come onto the podcast this question. What does a good leader look like to you?
It's a really good question. I think one is a good leader is someone who sets a standard, ideally a high standard, and holds a standard. Because I hear so many times leaders or people who call themselves leaders, well, I don't think they're good. They speak about standards and things, but they don't hold it. So set a standard, someone who sets a high standard and holds a standard and leads with example, someone who cares about his team and invests in their team. I heard this quote or this stat when I attended a live workshop from a company making over 200 million a year, and their leadership team were sharing this, where they said that only 20% of companies had a back-end strategy to back up the front-end strategy, meaning like investing in their team, in their hiring, and that the 20% that did that had 3 times more revenue, which is no surprise. So someone who cares about their team and invests in them, and ultimately who's good at allocating resources, which is what everything that I speak about is related to. So yeah, someone who's really good at allocating resources, time, energy, attention, and money.
Excellent answer. I appreciate that. And I've seen you make those changes in people that we both know. And so I'm excited to kind of dive into this a little bit. So before we do, just like for you to give the audience a little bit of context on who you are and a little bit about your background, especially your experience working with high impact people in your current role.
For sure. So I actually come from an interesting background. I say interesting because seems like it has nothing to do with what I do today, but I actually studied mechatronics engineering. I have a bachelor degree in that, worked as a research assistant in an R&D center for General Motors and as a strategic and data scientist at Nike. And that was all before I found out just my passion as a coach. I've always been super passionate about like peak performance, personal development. I had a lot of the people that I admired. I was always asking myself, how did they achieve the results that they achieve in life? And I realized that it was not because they had more time, because there's a limited amount of time. The whole thing about resources that I mentioned before is we're limited with them. So, and the results that they had in a lot of areas in life that I wanted to achieve as well were like astronomically bigger than what I've seen other people achieve. So I was like, it's definitely not because they just work more hours, because that's just not the factor. Like that just can't be the factor. So I'm like, how do you maximize those units of time? So that's kind of like what got me super passionate into like peak performance and personal development in general. And then I developed this passion after learning that I can actually do that for a living and become a coach. So I decided to become a coach, go all in with that. Part of my experience and my preparation, I'm a certified coach recognized by the International Coaching Federation, by the world's leading institute in peak performance and flow. I have more than 1,000 hours of coaching. I've coached over 300 clients in multiple formats, one-on-one, group, in person, online, you name it, done a lot of it. And a lot of these people or clients that I've worked with are anywhere from 6 to even high 7-figure clients. So I've been able to work with a lot of different levels of people. And I've seen basically a lot when it comes to coaching people and seeing how they perform in their lives and helping them achieve their peak performance version of themselves. And I'm currently the client success manager at Summit Acquisition Inc. We basically help small business owners, mainly coaches, to scale their businesses to 30K per month and 100K per month in multiple niches. And I'm responsible for 150 clients, basically just in charge of helping them get results, which in a lot of cases just involves me helping them get out of their own way, operating at their peak level, mindset stuff. So that's a little bit about my background. Not sure if there's anything that I missed that you would like for me to include.
No, that's actually a perfect segue to what I wanted to talk about with you next. The fact that you help a lot of people get out of their own way, and you're working primarily in like mindset work. And so I've learned over the last 2 years of doing the coaching that I do that mindset really is really where the needle moves with most people. And so, how do you go about actually changing mindsets in people? Like, what are some of the tools or the techniques or the things that you do or say or use to help people actually get out of their own way and change the way that they think about the world?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think if you would have asked me a year ago, I probably would have not given you the right answer. I would have probably said something like, yeah, it's this specific tool because, yeah, there are like certain tools, tactics, stuff that you can share with people when it comes to time management, like the actual stuff. But I've realized the more and more reps that I have in terms of coaching people is that most cases, it's never about the thing that they should be doing. It's something internally about themselves. So what I think differentiates a good coach from a bad coach is we tend to believe that good coaching is just sharing knowledge with people. But I realized that's not what good coaching is. It's the power of asking the right questions. So I was given this example that if you were able to look in like a coaching conversation between a coach and a coachee, the activity inside of their brains, a good coach is where in the conversation, the brain that is like lighting up is the one from the coachee, not the coach. And when you're the one sharing knowledge and teaching stuff, that's more of like a consultant, not necessarily coaching. And if we were able to see the activity in the brain, it would be the coach's brain who's lighting up. So being a good coach is, if I would have to sum it one thing, is asking good questions. And in order to ask good questions, you need to be a good listener and be present, right? So to understand what's actually going on, because most of the cases, what they say initially is not the actual problem. So that ability of being able to ask good question, again, and the way that you form those good questions is by listening properly. Of course, there's a lot of other stuff in terms of the experience that you need to have to be able to solve or to ask the right questions for a specific niche or problem. But it would be that the ability to ask good questions.
Amazing. I love this because asking good questions, listening to understand instead of listening to respond, those are all qualities and traits of a good leader as well as a good coach. And if you think about it, a coach is leading someone and leaders are always coaching someone. So there's a lot of kind of interwoven dynamics between coaching and leadership. So it's fascinating to me that the answer that you gave is the same as the answer I would give to someone who is trying to figure out what a good leader looks like. So I find that pretty interesting.
Yeah, there's definitely a nice interlap there.
So tell me a little bit about, we were talking a couple weeks ago, you and I were together at a retreat in Spain. And one of the things that we covered while we were there was this idea of prioritization. And I found that the workshop that you gave around prioritization was incredibly valuable to us. In fact, I'd say that we came away from that particular presentation, felt like that was probably the most valuable thing that we got away from the entire time. So I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about prioritization, why it's important, how you go about helping people prioritize the things that are actually important in their lives.
For sure. And first of all, love to hear that workshop was that impactful because, yeah, that's basically what I've based my entire work or the majority of it during the last 3 years, which I think is super important. So I'm glad to see that you were able to see that impact as well. But yeah, so basically going back to resource allocation, as I mentioned at the beginning, that's like the main thing that I focus on. Why it's important to understand that, because we need to understand that ultimately we're humans, which means that we're limited with resources. When I say resources, time, energy, and attention, time seems to be the most tangible one because yes, it's very easy for us to see like, yeah, we have 24 hours in the day. If I just lost one doing whatever, I still have 23 available, right? Unfortunately, we don't have like an indicator with our phones that tells us like, oh yeah, you have 80% energy available, right? Because minutes that you
That'd be
spend
nice.
it would be nice. Unfortunately, we're not there yet. We'll see in the future. But unfortunately, the hour that you and me spend doing something, even though it's the same amount of time in terms of the output that we can get, even if we're doing the exact same thing, can be completely different based on how we allocate our attention and our energy. So the first thing is understanding that concept that we're limited with resources, and the word limited, which I know sounds stupid for me to say sometimes, but people seem to forget that. Limited means that we run out of it. So reminding ourselves of that we run out of them due to the laws of nature and physics. And knowing that, then the game becomes resource allocation. I know that I have limited resources. So the whole game is how can I allocate those in the most optimal way so that I get the best output for the input that I put in. That can be time, money, right? So when it comes to prioritizing, is first understanding that concept and that the whole game is about resource allocation. And then once we understand that, there's a specific process that we can follow in order to identify what are the different activities that we can do in order to get the best output, right? So I actually have a really good example that happened with a client that I was having a call this week. Has a huge business, high 7 figures, And I realized it was just a very interesting story that I think is going to help me drive home the point. So I was basically having this conversation with him where I was helping him plan his week. And I asked him this question that is also really helpful to prioritize. What is the one thing that you could do this week that would make everything else easier or unnecessary? And knowing that your clients, people that you work with or that watch this channel love books, The One Thing by Gary Keller, amazing book, highly recommend it. But ask him that question. What's one thing that if you did this week would bring a huge output, would be make everything else easier or unnecessary? And he was like, yeah, there's this one strategy that he shared with me. He was like, if I'm able to pull out this project this week that potentially generate hundreds of thousands of dollars for the business. I'm like, cool, let's map it out. And what we did is we went to his calendar, we defined the day where he was going to work on it. And I was like, okay, the more clear that we can be in terms of the steps that you need to take, the easier it is to execute on something. So I was like, let's start breaking down this thing. He starts giving me the breakdown of the actual step-by-step process that he needed to take in order to achieve this thing. And it was funny when I saw this, and this is the point that I want to drive home. As he was giving me the step-by-step process, he just suddenly did something like this. And he was like, no, but maybe we should work on something else this week. This seems like this is going to be way easier than what I expected. And it's just going to take like 30 minutes or an hour. And I'm like, okay, let me hold you right there. Where is that coming from? It's coming from this conditioning that we have to believe that more hours worked equals more output or equals more productivity. And that's a big mistake that most people, myself included, because we've literally been conditioned to see hours worked or effort invested into something as being productive, when ultimately what we want is the output. So I'm like, I want you to see what just happened. Why are you telling me that you would prefer to do something else? He's like, because I just realized that this is only going to take me like 30 minutes. I'm like, cool. What is the output of those 30 minutes? Is it still the hundreds of thousands of dollars that you mentioned? He was like, yeah. I'm like, okay, is there any other activity that you can think that would generate more money than this thing, even if it took you 4 days to work? He was like, no. And I'm like, okay, that's a big problem right there, right? Like, we tend to pride ourselves or believe that if we don't invest a lot of effort, energy, time, attention into something, that it's not worth it because that's like an input-based mindset and we need to shift that to output-based. I'm like, don't you think it's amazing? Like, if you're able to do this in an hour and then have the rest of the week to enjoy and this generates hundreds of thousands of dollars to your business, wouldn't be cool? He looks at us like, well, yeah. I'm like, well, that's a whole game of prioritization. And that's resource allocation. And it's thinking of like, what is the output that I can get for the input that I'm putting in? And there's this concept of leverage that you've probably heard and spoken about before, where basically it's just like leverage is the thing that you put in between the input and the output so that you can maximize the output by having less input. So leverage is something like this, working on something that, I mean, I asked him, if this generates only $100,000 for your business and it took you 30 minutes, isn't that a good ROI? $100,000 for a 30-minute investment? Like, pretty good, right? So if instead of thinking of the game of like, how can I work on something that just takes a lot of my time and effort and attention? How can I get the most amount of value by the least amount of input and priding yourself of that? In my opinion, that's most gangster move. Like, if you can make something happen in 1 minute that generates millions of dollars for your business, like, that's way better than spending hours and hours on something. So that concept of removing that conditioning of being input-based mindset to output, it's really important to then apply what I'm about to share, which is like the actual step-by-step. So it's having this like an output-based mindset, and then actually going through this process of where just a very simple process that I recommend, where you just basically make a list of all the things that you need to work on in your current business, project, team, or whatever is the thing that you're working on. And then you basically just define in a scale to 10, you make the list. So let's say that you have 10 points. For then each of the points, you write two things: impact and effort. Impact meaning the impact that this is going to have in terms of the output for you, your life, your business, whatever the project is that you're working on, and the effort, the resources that it's going to require. And then you just rank the effort and the impact in a scale from 1 to 10. You do the same thing for impact and for effort, and then you just get the difference, where you basically just do impact minus effort. You're going to get a number. So just to give you an example, let's say that in your company, one of the new things that you need to do is hire a new sales manager because your sales team grew. It's a mess because there's a lot of new people. We need someone to manage them. So the impact for that would be probably a 10. Let's say that the effort is 5, just based on the experience in the HR department. Like, let's say that the effort for the company would be a 5, then the difference would be 5 in that case, right? So just a very simple process. Then what you do, basically, once you have that difference for all of the points that you listed and the things that you need to do right now, is you prioritize them. The way that you can go ahead and prioritize them is first by the difference. So you start by ranking the difference. The bigger the difference, the higher the priority. Why? Because it means that there's a big discrepancy between how big of an impact something is going to have versus the cost that is going to take you to make that thing happen, right? The resources that you're going to have. It's just basically having that ability to think about the output that you're going to get for the input and prioritizing based on that.
And I'll say, Eduardo, this exercise that you just talked through, there's two parts to it, at least from my perspective. One is what you were just talking about in terms of prioritizing and ranking the delta between value and cost. for each task that you need to do, whatever's on your to-do list, right? And so ranking them by the delta between how much effort it takes versus how much return you get, that was super impactful for me. And then the second part is something that you've also taught the community before, which was how to actually allocate your time, energy, and attention, like starting with sleep and working from there all the way up. And actually building out and constructing your entire calendar for the week so that you are maximizing types of energy that you have at different times of each day and kind of following your circadian rhythm and figuring out what works best for you and finding time to make sure you prioritize the things that are nourishing and replenishing so that you don't just spend all of your time and energy and attention on just these tasks that are usually energy draws from us. And I think that your ability to link those two different processes that you use to help people kind of figure out what they should be doing at any given moment, super, super valuable. And you think about the life of an executive, someone who's running an organization, has a team of 50 or 500 or 5,000 people. We have a couple people in our community who have 5,000 people on their team. And think about what they have to do every day, day after day. They have the same exact 24 hours as you and I. They have to make the most of that time. And they're not going to do that by working harder. They only are going to do that by maximizing what they can output and maximizing the amount of leverage that they can use in order to actually deliver all of that. And so we talked, for example, at the mastermind about the process of whenever you have work that you have to do, doing an audit, eliminate, automate, or delegate any of that work so that you clear your calendar to do higher level things and continuously level yourself up while leveling up the people underneath of you as well.
100%. And I think it's a really interesting conversation. I love how you're linking it up to the executives, because of course that's a bit of a different type of avatar that I've personally worked with one-on-one. I mean, there is a lot of similarities, right, that we've seen in the conversations that you and me have had. But yeah, I think just to emphasize on that thing that you mentioned very slightly, but again, just the small things that have a really big impact. It all starts by optimizing yourself, right? Because ultimately, again, we need to maximize those units of time, right? So starting with the sleep and optimizing your calendar, again, going back to the whole point of we're limited with resources, you have to see yourself as if you're a car and you have like a tank of gas, right? And it's limited. You have X amount of liters that you can use. And while you're awake, you're performing and you're consuming those resources, right? So sleep is like the best way to pump gas into your tank. That's like a non-negotiable. That's when it comes to like peak performance. They've been doing a lot of studies recently in terms of like how much sleep, nutrition, exercise, diet, those things affect your performance. And sleep trumps all of them like by a lot.
So that actually answers one of the questions I was going to ask you, which is what is the number one thing that people should do to optimize their lives? And I think you just gave the answer to that question.
Yes. Fixing their sleep 100%. And if I can give just another really quick one, because of course you can go into the very deep into how to optimize your calendar and do this, but no, like sleep and getting rid of distractions, meaning getting rid of this thing. Like you would be scared to know the numbers of how much time people spend today, or the average knowledge worker spends today in actual deep work. And it's all because of this thing right here. So if you get rid of your smartphone for when you're supposed to be doing actual work, or get rid of the distractions and fix your sleep, that's like the 20% that would give you 80% of the results that you want in basically all areas of life.
Yeah, I remember you telling us a metric that when someone is in deep work and then they are distracted either by a ding from their smartphone or someone coming and tapping them on the shoulder and just asking a very quick 5-second question. I think you said that the amount of time in productivity lost that it takes for them to get back to that same state of mind is like 26 minutes or something like that.
23 minutes, yes.
23 minutes of lost productivity when someone taps you on the shoulder and asks you a question, because they're taking you out of deep work state and putting you into task state, right?
Yes. So distraction, which is also another way of saying interruption to your workflow. And just to be clear of what you just said, you don't even have to actually respond to someone. Even just being in my computer, and let's say even if I see a notification pop up in my screen right now, even that very small thing, or just having the phone in the back or in your desk and just listening like the notifications, even if you don't answer them, that is an interruption to your workflow. Each of those interruptions takes you 23 minutes to get back into a state of focus. And let me ask you something, which is where the numbers get really scary. How many of those interruptions do you think that the average person gets in a day today?
Oh my goodness. Dozens, probably?
Hundreds.
Hundreds.
So with some studies that they were doing from the organization that I got certified by, they realized that the average knowledge worker today spends less than 2 hours doing actual productive work. And I think less than 11 minutes in actual deep work state of focus, which is scary. But at the same time, presents an amazing opportunity for those who leverage that and learn how to protect their focus when they're working to just crush the goals that they have because the bar is set so low. So it's an interesting world that we're living in.
Wow, Eduardo, really impressive body of knowledge that you just dropped on us here. I'll be honest with you. Every time I listen to you talk, I learn something new, and it's reinforcing some of the things that we've talked about. And I feel like it's something that I almost want to listen to this podcast over and over again, probably once a week, just to remind myself of what's really important. So with that, tonight, we're going to dive in a little bit deeper in the community. We're going to get into an actual project with all of the clients. We're going to have 50 people on a call, and we're all going to get into actually working on these prioritization and laying out our time, energy, and attention as a project in the community. So I'm excited to see that actually practically applied across the entire cohort of people in the community. Before we wrap up, I had one last question for you, and I ask everybody this. What are you reading this week?
Yeah, so right now I'm reading Profits First, amazing book, learning a lot about, like the author says, how to eradicate entrepreneurial poverty, learning a lot of lessons from it, loving the book, very highly recommended. But yeah, that's my current read.
It's a great book. I bought it, and it is in a box somewhere between here and Georgia on a moving truck. So at some point, I'll be able to finish the book. But yeah, it is a very powerful book. It talks about paying yourself first as an entrepreneur, and then from there, investing in the business the right way and all of that. So very powerful book. I'm glad you're reading that. Eduardo, thank you very much for your time, for all of this incredible knowledge and wisdom that you've brought. I've watched you change people's lives. You've helped me change mine. And I think that the work that you do is incredibly impactful. And I know that the last time we had you on as a guest speaker inside the community, record-setting audience, and people still search for and watch back that hour-and-a-half long conversation that you had with them. So I'm excited to see, another generation of people inside the community get to learn from you. And also, especially since your ideas and concepts have evolved quite a bit since that last conversation.
Yeah, just a bit, but really appreciate it, Tom. It's a huge honor to be here and also to hear this coming from you. If the last workshop was good, just wait for this one. Have a lot of amazing resources ready to show their community as well. I just want to say that it's mutual. Every time that I speak with you, I learn so much and I look up to you a lot as well. So really, really appreciate you, and have no idea how much it means for me to hear the impact that it's had. So again, just really want to thank you for the space and the invitation today.
Well, Eduardo, again, thank you. Thank you so much. This is super valuable. And for those of you watching this, if you found this to be valuable, please let Eduardo know in the comments below that this was valuable. And if you want to connect with Eduardo, we'll put his contact info down in the description of this video as well. So, Eduardo, thank you so much. Folks, I will see you in the next one.